Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be looking at a Yamaha B-3 V-fet amplifier. This amplifier has been fully restored. It works really well, sounds very good. Works same or better than factory new. We also did some upgrades to the speaker post. Here we have more modern speaker post to allow for better, more modern speaker cable connectors. New power receptacle, very good sounding amp. Before we listen to this amp, I want to go over a couple of topics that come up for discussion fairly often around B3, and that is what sounds better, a B3, two B3s, a B2, and I want to offer my feedback based on what I learned over the years listening to these amplifiers and things to watch out for when comparing these amplifiers or considering other opinions on one sounds different or better than the other. So two more very important things here is the condition of the units that are being compared, and obviously the rest of the system in which they're playing in. And that is also important for those of you that are interested in getting your feet wet with V-fet amplifiers that haven't had a V-fet amplifier before, considering getting one. It's important to understand their strengths and their limitations, and the synergy with certain systems and lack of synergy with others. So let's first talk about the later of the two subjects that I mentioned right now, which is the strengths and weaknesses of these amps and what systems they thrive in and what systems they're not. All right, so most of every single V-fet amplifier that's been made in the 70s does not like demanding loads. So in other words, if your speakers are, let's say, less than 4 ohms, you need to be cautious on what you're buying, which V-fet amplifier you're buying. Not many of them handle loads lower than that, and even the ones that do, they don't do exceptionally well there. All right, that said, let's be very specific now about the B-3 and what does the B-3 like and why is it important to know before getting one. B-3 can be actually, as a matter of fact, is the only amplifier made as a V-fet amplifier made, if I'm thinking correctly, from every manufacturer, Sony, Yamaha, JVC, Victor, or others, that it's configurable to work in either stereo or mono. I'm talking about V-fet amplifiers only. So vintage V-fet amplifiers only. And this is a Japan-only product, and there are not too many brochures in English, but the rear of the unit clearly states that you either use it in stereo with no lower than 4 ohms, so 4 ohms and above in stereo, and or mono with 8 ohms and above. And there is a very specific reason for that. When configured in mono, the amp can take no lower than 4 ohms on each side. When I'm configuring stereo, but when configuring mono, the way the circuit works is basically connecting the two amps in series. And when you do that, and you're driving a speaker with a mono configuration, you're essentially splitting the load from that speaker on each of the amps. So, for example, I have the Yamaha NS-2000s here. These are 6 ohm loads. They're fairly linear loads and fairly high efficiency, over about 90 dB. So they're not extremely difficult to drive, but nonetheless, they're 6 ohms. So what a monoblock B3 sees essentially sees 3 ohms on each one of the amps. And you could already see that's already below of what Yamaha recommends for stereo mode, which is 4 and above. But now let's say my speakers are 4 ohms, that in that case, if they were 4 ohms, then each of the amplifiers inside the unit would have to handle 2 ohms on each side. And that's already difficult for a V-fet amplifier to handle, very difficult. So is the amp going to necessarily go into production? No, it's going to probably work. It's going to work hard, and it's not going to work efficient. And the lack of details, or the lack of detail of the sound will start to suffer. So if I were to summarize all that word soup, I would say if you're using the B3 and BTL, you need to have speakers that are 8 ohms or above. Otherwise, you will not get the best out of that amplifier. So consider that if you are considering buying a B3 or 2 B3s basically. Now, I do have other B3s here, and the reason you're not seeing me doing a demo with 2 of them, which I could, probably will someday, is because in my system with my 6 ohm load speakers, they don't sound as good as a B3 in stereo. So basically 2 B3s in mono, because of the load of my speakers, they lose a little bit of the details on the highs to a B3 in stereo. Same thing for the B2, because that's always a stereo amplifier. It cannot be configured. So, and that's a beast comparing to the B3. You essentially need 2 B3s to come up to a B2 in terms of power delivery. Okay, so now we established the differences between monoblock and working in stereo and why speaker loads are important. So consider that when you're building your system and asking what to buy. As far as which one to buy, should I buy the B3 or the B2 or other V-fet amps? My straight and short answer is buy whichever one you find or whichever one you can get your hands on. The differences are going to be extremely minor. They're all very good sounding amplifiers. You're going to hear people being where their jaw drops when they hear these things, and they're in original condition. These are nearly 50 years old amplifiers. We're going to get to condition in a minute, but my suggestion is get whatever you could get your hands on, and find somebody that could restore them well. These amplifiers, and we're going to get to condition in a minute, as far as restoration, just a simple recap is not going to suffice. So we're going to get to that in a minute. Let's finish the comparison. So now there are going to be questions about what sounds better. Let's say you don't need a lot of power. What sounds better, let's say, between 0 and 50 watts, between a B2 and stereo, obviously that's always stereo, and a B3 stereo, which is this one right here. And I would say to you right now that the amplifier is basically a very similar circuit, made the same output parts, the same V-fets, made by the same company, same philosophy, same type of everything else. It's very similar. And I would say that the sound signature is very, very, very similar as a result. No wonder. There may be some nuances that are different, that could make a difference depending on the speaker load. I did notice that the B2 has more woomph, and it may have to do with some of the parts that we use now for power supply. I don't think when they were brand new that it would have been much more different, but the parts that we use right now for power supply are a little bit beefier, power caps, filter caps, and again, that is a educated guess. I haven't done substantial analysis on that, but that's what causes me to believe that that's the reason. Again, the differences are minor, and you don't hear them all the time, only in special different passages between notes and songs that emphasize lows. Otherwise, they're very similar. So I would say to you, do not if you like meters, of course, there's no choice. You're gonna have to get the B2, or if you don't like the cube look, which I like the strange, simple cube look of the B3. Some people say it's ugly. It's either love it or hate it. I like that look of it. So it doesn't matter. My point is, as far as the sound, there are minor differences. It should not matter. You should be paying more attention to availability of someone be able to service it. Okay, let's talk about condition. So condition is important because comparing these units, they absolutely have to be in the same condition. If you're not comparing them in the same condition, you're basically comparing the aging of one amp over the other. And based upon that concept and that around that subject is most of the comparison analysis done in these amplifiers that I've seen online are basically between units that have different condition. And so those are comparing apples to oranges as far as like their ability to deliver sound. They don't work like new or being the same age. So I actually, even within the same model unit, I tried to emphasize this with a Sony TAN7 video where we looked at multiple units of the same model. If the unit is not restored to the same level, doesn't use the same quality parts, is not adjusted similarly, they will sound different, even within the same model, let alone within different models. So all the comparisons that I've seen and people that provide opinions, this sounds better than that. Well, they're not, like, bottom line is those units, honestly, they were not at the same level of condition. So to me, there's very little weight that I would put on that type of analysis, period. I will stop there. There are some people that I know that have both models that are fully decked out. I just haven't seen their opinion published anywhere. Anyways, okay. So again, going back to condition, simple recap will not cut it for these amplifiers. These need to be thoroughly restored. These are nearly 50 years old. There's certain components inside these amps that are well past their expected life. They're basically on borrowed time. And so the restoration needs to be thorough. It needs to be done by somebody that understands V-fet amplifiers and that can bring them back for them to sound as new. All right. I hope I covered both topics sufficiently. If I missed anything or if you have any observations, please don't hesitate to leave them in the comments. We're gonna do some listening now. As a source, we have a Luxman that uses a tube on the buffer stage, on the output stage. This Luxman CD player works really well with the tube on the output or just 100% solid state. Very good sounding CD player. Preamp duties go to this Luxman preamp. My recording is via an iPhone, so it needs improvement. My room is fairly medium size, I would say, not treated. Speakers I'm using are the Yamaha NS-2000s, and these are 6-on loads. All right, so those are the conditions of the sound and what you're going to be hearing. So I hope you take that with a grain of salt. Don't think that what you hear in the speakers over the internet from my iPhone is precisely what I hear here, but I'm hoping that I'm giving you a directional idea of how my system sounds. So please enjoy and leave comments if you have to.
Shake it, break it, then feel the word. With the UP jazz band, you're gonna swing all night. We gonna shake it, break it, and that's what you like.
What we gonna do if we break it apart? And when you dance, you'll be breaking my heart. 1, 2, 3, and you climb in the tree. Don't let go if you want to ask me.
Ask me what it is.